Hello everybody, my name is Boulevard and welcome to the Legends of Runeterra Deck Masters Tournament. I wanted to quickly touch on the format that we're going to be playing in here, as it's pretty different from what we see in the West and in Korea even. So each player has brought 5 different decks, with each region being allowed to overlap one time. It is still a conquest style, no ban best of 5, so you must pick up a win with any 3 of your decks, but unlike other tournaments, once you play a deck, you're not allowed to play it anymore regardless of whether you win or lose. Hello everybody and welcome to match number 2 of the quarterfinals, FrozenWinter versus DK. My name is Boulevard, going to be bringing you the action here today. Now, FrozenWinter is a name that we've seen across the Korean Invitational tournaments that we've seen. I believe this is the 3rd one. We had the Korean Invitational back in January or February, I think at this point. Might have been either February or March, probably February. The timelines all kind of stringing together, and then last month we had the Kings of Runeterra tournament. So this is the 3rd one by my count, this Deck Masters tournament. So let's get into the decks a little bit here. So FrozenWinter, not necessarily running Bald Eagle or War Mother's control, as we don't see Braum coming out of the deck. There are no War Mothers coming out. It is just a little bit more streamlined on the Anivia plan, and then on the side of DK, we see Karma Lux, and the Blinding Assaults are a card that's pretty interesting in a deck like this. The main use that you get out of them is you can play a Blinding Assault, go for the scout attack into one of your opponent's units, and then play a Radiant Guardian that will then have the tough and lifesteal keywords, and then be able to attack with that during your normal combat phase. And DK, going to get sort of an atypical value out of this Blinding Assault, is actually going to be able to take out this Wording Stones with it, and if he wants to, could just go full on aggro, playing the second Blinding Assault as well as the Mage Seeker. Don't blame him for holding that one back though, as FrozenWinter does have Avalanche available to him. Would put yourself into sort of an awkward position with that one. Looks like he is considering committing the Mage Seeker at least though, to push through a little bit of damage. Not wanting to sort of risk that second Blinding Assault just yet. You know, gonna hold open the Deny mana for the following turn, potentially if the Avalanche does come out, but FrozenWinter going for the Wording Stone instead of the Catalyst, gonna play against him a little bit here, but he does still get the Catalyst on the following turn, and I don't think he's gonna be too mad about this, as skipping turn 3 into turn 5 is not nearly as important as skipping turn 4 into turn 6, getting that Anivia just a little bit earlier. If he had the 5 mana on this turn, I don't think it would have made too much of a difference. Does just get to float an extra spell mana, but DK still in a pretty commanding position. You know, could even just throw down the second Blinding Assault here if he wants to get really aggressive, as 2 copies of that card does represent 8 damage between the scout attack and the normal combat phase. So could be pushing FrozenWinter down to a pretty low life total on this following turn. FrozenWinter going to, you know, want to run out this Anivia and could just run into the Concerted Strike. It looks like we are going to go for the scout attacks first. Just an open attack out of DK makes a fair amount of sense. Going to push through that bit of damage. We see the Anivia, and now Concerted Strike can kill this, which means that the Blinding Assault Valor will be able to just kill off the egg. And, you know, sort of not how you expect the Karma Lux versus Anivia harrowing matchup to work out, but DK just going balls to the wall on the aggro so far and getting rewarded for it. FrozenWinter has a really weak hand, you know, between a little bit more ramp with this Wording Stone, a couple dead copies of Glimpse Beyond, a couple dead copies of the harrowing. And, you know, we could see this Glimpse Beyond it just to be mana efficient, but I think he wants to... I mean, you'd rather Glimpse Beyond the Anivia than the Egg, because the Egg at least does sort of act as a blocker, as the Valor has to challenge it out. You know, could fire off the Glimpse Beyond here if he really wants to anyway, which I wouldn't blame him for, as his hand is pretty weak at the moment, but perhaps understanding that nothing that he draws is going to be better than this Rekindler on the following turn to try and take out these Valors, which we could even see the Deny out of DK if something like that happens. Another Anivia picked up by FrozenWinter does keep that one in the hand, runs out the Rekindler, perhaps valuing this Harsh Winds that he finds, but DK has another Concerted Strike, which does mean he has the option to keep this Anivia from getting the attack off. And because we are still far from turn 10, it will not upgrade. It will be a vulnerable Anivia on the following turn as well. It looks like that is what he wants to fire off. These Concerted Strikes, finding an odd amount of value in a matchup like this, just being able to protect this low, wide board that he's got for himself so far. But it does, you know, at least mean that neither Lux nor Karma get to come out this turn, though Karma not super useful until we actually see the Enlightenment turn. Pass back over to FrozenWinter, who does finally pick up this Avalanche, although now DK has mana for both a Champion and the Deny. It looks like considering running one of these out. I think Lux makes a bit more sense just because you do have the attack token. You'd like to get the Lux down on the attack turn if you can, as that barrier that she has is going to play out phenomenally for you when it comes to combat interactions. Here we do see the Lux thrown down. And now FrozenWinter, it's sort of an awkward situation. He can use the Harsh Winds to protect this Anivia if he really wants to. I'm not sure how much that actually works out for him, as he does probably want to fire off the Avalanche this turn, which will clean up the Ignivia anyway. His Harrowings are looking really good for the following turn, though, but unless he can get the deny out of DK, it's not going to mean too much. And here we do see the Avalanche fired off. This will take the barrier off of the Lux. Does mean that it will not be able to attack into this Rekindler, at least not safely, as you do open yourself up to Vile Feast at that point. It's a bit of a scary attack for DK, who actually doesn't let the deny rip off there to protect his board and continue on this aggro play. And I like that a lot, you know, understanding that the Harrowing is actually the win condition for a deck like this. You need to save your denies for that, not necessarily over-committing to this low-to-the-ground aggressive game plan that he got in the early game. So good reads on the side of DK, understanding that while it may have helped him a lot in the early game, Valor and Mage Seekers are not how you're going to win this game by any stretch of the imagination. You do need to switch gears, not firing that off to protect it. And now we are going to see this Unyielding Spirit as an option for DK. You know, it's really good to fire off if you're not against an Ionia deck, but Vengeance is still on the table from FrozenWinter, so instead we're going to see a block, and then if we see the Grasp of the Undying come out, maybe it comes out at that point. So, looks like DK could actually just go for a bit of a bait here. You know, throw that Lux out, entice FrozenWinter to throw out this Grasp of the Undying and get blown out by the Unyielding Spirit, but is instead just going to let this one go. Can play the Karma now. There's no real option that FrozenWinter is going to have other than the Vengeance to sort of get that taken care of before the Enlightenment turn. And it's possible that DK still playing respectfully of a Ruination isn't necessarily something that he wants to throw this deny onto. I think he is really saving it for the Harrowing, and we do see FrozenWinter has 2 copies of that. And while, you know, 2 copies does mean that the one deny isn't going to completely stop the plan, it does mean that you're a couple turns off of actually getting the second one down. So we're going to see Wording Stone potentially run out here. You know, just to be mana efficient, I guess, but that does weaken your Harrowing on the following turn, unless you're really just planning to throw this out as a blocker, but I'm not necessarily convinced that DK wants to attack with this Lux next turn. But now that we are at just 6 mana for FrozenWinter, could see the Unyielding Spirit proactively come out from DK, as there's not mana for either Vengeance or Grasp Vile Feast, and I think this is going to work out really well for him. Here we do see the Unyielding Spirit come down. FrozenWinter really got to be biting himself for playing this Wording Stone, you know, tapping below this pivotal bait mana, clogging up your board for the Harrowing. Now we're going to see Glimpse Beyond onto it, and I guess that's why he threw it out, was to get this Glimpse Beyond off, and DK just has the punish for tapping down below the Vengeance mana. Now we're going to see Tavern Keeper and Whale picked up, though. The healing does seem like it is just going to stall the inevitable, as I don't think there's much that FrozenWinter can do to stop this Lux. Of course, doesn't need to win the game with attackers. You know, you are one of the decks that can sort of get around this by just constantly attacking with multiple Anivias, pushing through damage that way. But the final sparks are going to play against you, and especially with the Enlightened Karma coming down, not necessarily next turn, but on the turn after that, you know, things are not looking great for FrozenWinter, who does throw down another juicy-looking final spark target. Here we see the Anivia Evolution. But with the Lux being upgraded, you know, you do have to block this every turn, and you don't necessarily want to block it with your Anivia, since the final spark can just take out the egg. Here we're going to see potential Karma out of DK, as he does have that second copy on backup. Might as well get that free spell out, and that's going to line up pretty well for FrozenWinter, as he does have the Grasp of the Undying. It's going to give him that little bit of extra healing that he really wants, but DK does have this Prismatic Barrier as well. So FrozenWinter, if he wants to commit his entire turn, actually can take out the Lux, or take out the Karma rather, but is actually just going to fire off a defensive Harrowing instead in order to give himself a best chance to win the game on the following turn. And that does mean that Deny probably has to come out from DK at this point. And this is one of the advantages that the Anivia deck has over the Darius deck. You can play these off-turn Harrowings and still get more or less full value out of them, since you'll be reviving multiple Anivias that'll be able to come out again on the following turn. Yeah, don't want to fire off that Glimpse Beyond, as it does mean that a potential Lux attack would have to get blocked by the Anivia, and then a health potion doubled up by the Karma would be enough mana to get that final spark and run over your egg. But now that DK has the Karma Lux combo fully online, I'm not even sure if a Harrowing is going to be enough to save FrozenWinter. We will get to see Judgment doubled up on, which potentially represents, yeah, this could be a lot of final sparks coming out of DK this turn, and at 13 HP, that's not enough for even 6 Anivias to end the game. Oh, and we even see a Relentless Pursuit picked up. But no answer for the Harrowing. That one is actually going to resolve. You know, Concussive Palm could come out if he really wants it to, but there's nothing that he has that can protect this Karma either. I think there are just a few too many Anivias. I think there are 4 Anivias coming out of FrozenWinter. You would have to stop 3 of them in order to actually protect this Karma. And I think he can only stop 2. Between the Concussive Palm and the barrier onto the Karma. Maybe with the Culling Strike, or not the Culling Strike, the Radiant Strike rather. Maybe at that point he's got enough to protect the Karma? I'm not totally sure. If this Karma lives through the combat phase though, you know, this is just game over for DK at the, or for FrozenWinter rather at that point. Is, you know, if you can get these Karmas to live through the turn to get out these Luxes, or to get off these final sparks rather, you know, that should just be lethal coming out of DK. Did already use the second Karma as an Inside of Ages, so even with 6 mana doesn't have the option to play that one out. This Glimpse Beyond is going to negate the Concussive Palms and deny the final spark pretty pivotally for FrozenWinter, who does pick up cards that are not particularly useful in a scenario like this, though I'm hard-pressed to imagine which ones would be. So now we do see 3 Anivias on the side of FrozenWinter, and that does mean that Radiant Strike and Prismatic Barrier are actually enough to keep the Karma alive and push through lethal, though he does also have to, you know, play defensively of the fact that there is a lot of damage coming out of FrozenWinter, not just through the Anivias, but in the course of actual attackers. I don't think that there's anything you can really do to keep this Karma alive, though we do get to see at least one final spark take out one of these Anivias. Could even throw it at the Egg Nivea just to push through maximum damage and still win the game without the Karma on board. Contemplating where he wants to throw this between the Egg Nivea for maximum damage or one of the Anivias to sort of give himself a better chance at surviving. And it looks like a single combat picked up and then put back. Or whatever was next to the Shadow Shift. Ah, yes, Succession. Actually going to summon 2 Dauntless Vanguards as well as create another final spark. So just going for the defensive play, understanding that he probably has this game on the following turn as long as he can survive this one. Just wants to minimize the amount of damage coming at him. This does mean that there's no chance for the Karma to survive. Might as well throw it out as a blocker. And that is going to be the case. So DK going to fall down to 3 HP here. A pretty scary life total to be at, but it is what it is. Looks like we're just moving around these blockers a little bit. There's no over-the-top damage coming out of FrozenWinter. There's nothing like an atrocity. It's really just these Anivias going over the blockers. But it does mean that, you know, DK does have another entire turn before these Anivias can attack again. And with this many final sparks in hand, I think he's got a pretty good shot at taking this one over. We'll get to take out at least 2 of the Anivias, if nothing else, through the final sparks. And that should be close to enough. So we're going to see the Glacial Storm number 1 fired off, Glacial Storm number 2. This is one of the animations that they never sped up. Double Anivia, triple Anivia. It takes a while to actually resolve. So we are going to see 1 Anivia hit FrozenWinter, but it looks like DK might have lined up the blocks incorrectly because that was a real Anivia, which means that it doesn't, you know, lose the ephemeral and then become an Egg Nivea. So there's actually just too many Anivias still alive on the side of FrozenWinter. DK looks like he sort of realized that he might have misaligned those blocks, and now there's 1 less Egg Nivea than he sort of anticipated, and he might not have the damage to push this one through. Final Spark might as well still come down onto the real Anivia, but you would have liked to see that clean up the Egg Nivea from one of the ephemerals. And it is sort of an easy thing to miss, you know, you just have to aim it, line it up on those ones with the ephemeral tag, but, you know, that is something that you should be doing at this high of a level. It looks like single combat's now being considered to sort of rectify the mistake, take out one of these Anivias. For maximum damage, if he really wanted to, DK could also, you know, throw out a final spark and then single combat something. The unit will die to the single combat. Will guaranteed push through the 6 damage, or the 4 damage rather, but that doesn't seem like it's going to make too much of a difference. Here we are going to take out another one of the Anivias and get the final spark off, but, you know, you still feel like that would have been much better used on the following turn. Here we see the final spark take it out again. That's going to push FrozenWinter down to 8. But DK's actually in a little bit of trouble. Now we're going to see the Anivias revive as Egnivias, come on back as real Anivias. And with this Chronicler of Ruin, as well as this Rekindler, he might have the defensive capabilities to actually get it done. This is a lot of math to be doing, and math is not my strong suit, so rather than kind of guess and contemplate onto whether or not DK has lethal, try to math it out for myself, especially because there are so many unknown factors here between the relentless pursuit as well as this deep meditation. You know, it's a little bit hard to say. I think he can at least take out enough Anivias to survive, but I don't know if he can survive the combat damage that is just going to come out of the Rekindler and possibly even the Kindly Tavern Keeper. Radiant Strike, I'm guessing that, yeah, that is going to be the 1 extra mana needed to create another final spark. Going to see that down onto the Egnivia, and now FrozenWinter is not in a position to win the game next turn, does have to commit something to the board. And we could see, yeah, Rekindler seeming pretty likely. That does mean Relentless Pursuit would be pretty likely to come out. Actually, just going to be the Kindly Tavern Keeper to get things started off, sort of discourage DK from going even harder this turn. And I really do think that the misaligned block onto the non-ephemeral Anivia is going to play against him a lot here. You know, if he still had that single combat available to him, I think DK would have a really good shot at winning this turn. But, you know, just that one small misstep could have turned the entire tides of this game. FrozenWinter, you know, just stealing a win he had no real business having. Now we see Blinding Assault, but that does mean that Relentless Pursuit is not enough to actually get the Lux upgrade again, as we did see Radiant Strike reset her down to 0, so now she's at 2 out of 5. The Relentless Pursuit puts her at 5 out of 6, and that's not enough for a final spark. This is just not enough from DK. Does have the Judgment, though, so I guess he's immune to the combat damage no matter what, so will survive the next turn if he can get another one of these Anivias off the board, or at least float 2 spell mana into the next turn so that he can throw out Deny onto one of the Anivia abilities and then Judgment the rest of the board. But that still, you know, that will give him 2 final sparks, assuming he goes Judgment and then Deny, just stacking things properly. But given the misaligned block, I'm not totally sure that's what's going to happen here. And now the Valor feels a little bit awkward. You know, it did bank 2 mana into the Lux, which is exactly what DK needed. So perhaps just playing really hard towards this Judgment Deny turn, understanding that he needed that 2 mana banked for the Deny to actually create another final spark, but we'll see if he misaligns the stack. I'm a little bit scared for him since we did see the misaligned block. You know, mistakes, they tend not to just be one at a time. They can have a snowballing effect, especially one that you realize after the fact, where it was a very obvious one. You know, not necessarily like a slight misplay or a misread on your opponent, but like an actual just straight up misplay like that, not blocking the ephemeral, or not blocking the real Anivia and letting an ephemeral hit him to die and turn into the egg. So we are at least going to see DK survive the turn, since there is no Fury of the North out of FrozenWinter. And it looks like we are going to stack things properly. Deny going to come out first, means that the final spark will come out of Lux, filling up that spell mana, then Judgment going to give her another final spark. And that does mean that all of the Anivias are going to be dead, at least for the time being. And Chronicler doesn't have a good target, since the Rekindler is going to die as well. And that should mean that DK, despite the misstep, despite the sort of scare that he had here, should still be able to pick this one up. Let me take a sip of water real quick. Stay hydrated. But yeah, FrozenWinter does still have a fair amount of healing in the hand, and it looks like that is going to be the plan he's playing towards, throwing out this Withering Wail. Going to put himself back up to 12. Judgment resolves. Does mean that the 2 final sparks are going to put him down to 8, but of course does have another Kindly Tavern Keeper, as well as a Grasp of the Undying. Unfortunately, Grasp not going to be able to protect him from the final spark, as it would kill his unit, and then the Overwhelm still pushes through maximum damage. Really not worth the 1 health trade-off that you get there. So there's final spark number 1. Here comes the Tavern Keeper. on to the life total of FrozenWinter, back up to 13. Final Spark going to drop him down to 11, but he's out of Anivia's, so he doesn't have that over-the-top damage to actually kill DK, who does still have a couple of options for the following turn in terms of defensive capabilities. Finds a health potion off the top even. That could be really big, as FrozenWinter did actually find an Anivia pseudonymically through this Rekindler, which he can Chronicler on his own turn if he doesn't want to go for an open attack. Get even another one just to play around the deny that could be coming out of DK. Looks like DK is thinking about just throwing out the double Radiant Guardian, representing just a lot of damage. And this Lux is back down to 0, as Judgment was the last card that we saw come out. So it would take a little bit of doing on DK's part to actually get a final Spark out this turn. 2-3 mana spells. But with the Relentless Pursuit and the Shadow Shift, and even just the Prismatic Barrier, does have the opportunity to get it done. Does have 6 mana left for him. The Rekindler top deck from FrozenWinter, probably the best thing he could have hoped for here. Harrowing would have been good too. Harrowing certainly would have been good too, but this one's a little bit more immune to deny, so a little bit of a safer top deck, though not necessarily the best one. This does still give DK space to win the game, and he is just going to attack with the Lux first, not wanting to open up this Radiant Guardian to something like a Grasp of the Undying, potentially. So we see the Lux attack come out. FrozenWinter does have to block this, but doesn't want to block it with the Anivia. That is the card that he needs to survive if he's going to be able to win this game. So likely to just see the Kindly Tavern Keeper thrown out. Or perhaps even deciding that, his board is resilient enough to the final sparks that he doesn't need to block this and can actually just take the 5 damage, since he does have the Grasp in hand still for healing, and that looks like that will be the case. Deciding that, if I'm going to win this game, it's unlikely that the Anivia ability is actually going to be enough. I'm probably going to have to get in some unit damage as well. So just preserving his board as much as possible, thinking that would be the end of DK's turn, knowing that a Final Spark wouldn't be able to kill him, but the randomly generated Relentless Pursuit from Karma's Insight of Ages going to come out now for DK. Would assume that we're going to attack with the Radiant Guardian as well this time around. Now we're going to see the block from the Kindly Tavern Keeper. No block from the Radiant Guardian would be really scary, although DK doesn't actually represent lethal this turn. FrozenWinter would fall down to 1. It would take the rest of DK's mana to actually create a Final Spark, but with a 4 and 5 health unit on the side of FrozenWinter, he will survive. No Overwhelm will come through, since the Tavern Keeper will be off the board as it's blocking the Lux. But it looks like FrozenWinter might just play this one a little bit safer, stay at the 6 health, and decide that Anivia should be enough to get this one done. Taking the Rekindler off the table is a little bit scary, as it does sort of, take that Chronicler play off the table, but if FrozenWinter is going to put his opponent at 1, then the Chronicler can't come out next turn anyway, because you do want to play around that burst speed into a Final Spark just killing you. It does have the Grasp of the Undying to sort of counter that, but we'll have to see how things play out exactly here, as things are getting a little bit dicey here. I think this Grasp of the Undying could be the difference maker for FrozenWinter if he wants to just... Okay. Actually, he's just going to throw the Grasp out onto his own Kindly Tavern Keeper. Keep the units alive. Does mean that he opens himself up for that Chronicler play on the following turn onto the Rekindler. This was another consideration, was grasping your own unit to sort of stop the Prismatic Barrier blowout from your opponent. And now DK is going to go for this Chronicler of Ruin. Nothing that DK has available to them in order to kill this Anivia, unless he can find a concerted strike off of this Deep Meditation. Finds a Remembrance and a Concussive Palm, and Concussive Palm will be enough, actually, as that will be able to stun out one of the Anivias, and then gives him 3 blockers. The Health Potion will let him survive, and if DK survives the turn, I'm hard-pressed to imagine a losing scenario for him. And it looks like he's going to throw out the Final Spark as well as the Concussive Palm, getting all of it down in the same breath. DK. A slight misstep on the way that he blocked, but picked it back up with the proper stack interaction with the Judgment. It looks like he's going to have it again here with the Concussive Palm and the Final Spark. So DK takes a bit of a misplay earlier, but resets the mental and is able to come back and do it in a very clutch scenario as we're getting down into the final portions of this game number 1 here. Concussive Palm onto the Anivia. Final Spark blasting across the board onto the Chronicler of Ruin. 1 damage left. It is 2 life to 3, but the health potion in DK is going to be the difference maker. Putting him back up to 5 life. Going to be 3 all here as we see a block from the Lux down onto this. And this does mean that Lethal should be coming out next turn through Final Sparks. Come hell or high water, DK has found a way with the Karma Lux to take out this Anivia deck of FrozenWinter. And boy, oh boy, was this one a doozy. About 25 minutes into the game here, and that is about as long as a Legends of Runeterra game gets. It looks like Shadow Shift was actually even being considered to pick back up the tail of the dragon, turn that back into a Concussive Palm, as well as get the Final Spark online to push FrozenWinter down to 1 life with the Anivia. But it will just be a pass, deciding that he doesn't need that Concussive Palm back. As well as there just still being 6 mana on the side of FrozenWinter does mean that Grasp of the Undying is still a consideration. Maybe you want to save that Shadow Shift to dodge something like that. So we're just going to see the Prismatic Barrier, and I think that almost certainly guarantees that that is what is on DK's mind, as this does play around the Grasp of the Undying much better. If you had gone for the Shadow Shift, the Grasp came out, that would be a heartbreaker for DK, who should be able to just win this game. Entreat now guarantees the Anivia, which means, guarantees the Anivia, which means Harsh Winds is on the table for FrozenWinter. Picks up another Entreat as well, although I don't think there are any Anivias left in the deck, so he would have to Harsh Winds first, then throw out the Entreat in order to get it back, but doesn't have the mana for all of that anyway, as that is a 14 mana play. See the Mage Seeker come out now on the side of DK. Just has to push one of these units down below 4 HP for the Final Spark Lethal off of this Remembrance. Ooh, but the Remembrance isn't going to work if this Mage Seeker dies. I think you just have to run out the Remembrance now to guarantee the Final Spark. I actually like attacking the Anivia a little bit better, as it does put it down into it makes it survive the attack. And maybe we're just going to see Shadow Shift down onto the Mage Seeker here once these Harsh Winds come out. I think it's a little more likely that we see, Shadow Shift onto the Mage Seeker potentially going to happen here. I think playing it onto the Lux would be buck wild. You could still play it onto the Radiant Guardian as well, as long as you get one of these units down below the 3 health threshold. But that's not what DK did, so now we have a 4 mana Remembrance, actually just not even going to play it. So DK had guaranteed lethal from an observer perspective. In his mind there is still a Grasp of the Undying potentially to be playing around, so we didn't see the Shadow Shift come out. So he's playing this one a little bit safe. My concern is that he could be playing this too safe and could get hard punished for his efforts here. He is still out of range of 1 Anivia, so we are going to get to see that come down. If Vengeance comes down, I think this is just the end of the game, as we will see then Karma into Remembrance, not only creating 2 Final Sparks, but getting multiple doubled up Final Sparks anyway. If FrozenWinter has the foresight to play the Harsh Winds instead, then Vengeance can still be saved for the Karma. And here we do see the Harsh Winds now. So, God, I thought this game was over at 3-3. Now we are down to 1-1 in terms of life totals. And FrozenWinter still has the Vengeance mana for that Karma. And could you imagine losing a game where you have had a Lux with Unyielding Spirit on it for this long against a deck that doesn't have anything to say about it? And here we see the Vengeance now, but that does mean that Shadow Shift gets to come out onto the Karma. It's not going to create a Final Spark, or maybe it will. So the first Shadow Shift comes out, and then, oh right, because of the way that Shadow Shift works, oddly enough, you do get, the double Shadow Shift off, as awkward as it is. So you do still get to double up on that spell. Typically with a targeting spell like that, the second one would fizzle after the first one resolves, but the Shadow Shift fully replaces the thing, so the targets are still coming out onto it. Now has this the second shadow available to him in his hand. Now we're going to see Karma come back down. FrozenWinter still finds the Vengeance top deck to sort of stop this Karma play from happening. It looks like DK just going to play this one a little bit faster, still throw out the Remembrance. Might as well throw the Karma out at this point. Or Shadow Assassin, you know, just anything. You can throw out the Remembrance first. It really doesn't matter how DK plays this one. We know that he's got lethal. We are going to see the Ruination fired off to prevent the lifesteal out of DK and that Radiant Guardian, but with Lux and the Ignivia surviving, it does mean that Remembrance is just going to be lethal. You see Shadow Assassin come down. And actually, is Remembrance not? No, I mean, the Shadow Assassin herself is lethal. You know, just attacking for 2. But we are going to see the single combat take out the Ignivia, and that means that these attacks are finally how DK is going to take himself to the first win of this series 30 minutes in. Alright, game number 2, DK picking that one up in a long slugfest, both players down to 1 HP when all was said and done, but it's a new game, and we're going to have DK on Fearsome Indoor Spiders with Mark of the Isle, Glimpse Beyond, and Atrocity is the only spells in the deck. 1 copy of the Mark of the Isle, as well as the Scuttlegeist. So going all in on this Fearsome plan, we do see They Who Endure is the only Freljord card in the deck, so the chances of a Wraithcaller missing pretty low. And on the side of FrozenWinter, we've got Karma Ezreal. Now, as I had mentioned in the last game, these decks are a little bit older. We are seeing, you know, these decks were locked in about 2 weeks ago, so FrozenWinter not having that One of Vi adaptation that we've seen a lot more often out of these Karma Ezreal decks. He's going to get his Eye of the Dragon down, though, and that's about as good of a start as you could hope for. The problem is that you are against a nearly all Fearsome deck, so that is not going to actually play out super well for you. We get the Elise down. Now we're going to get Bark Beast as well as Wraithcaller, or Mist Wraith, rather. And that means that, you know, not only can the Eye of the Dragon not block anything but the Ravenous Butcher or a Spiderling, you know, actually could block the Bark Beast if that's the route that you want to go, though. DK might actually just hold that one back, understanding that there's a good chance that FrozenWinter is going to want to block one of these 1/1s. Or throw a Mystic Shot down onto something. But yeah, the Fearsome actually going to play out beautifully here. One of the problems that we've seen with the Karma Ezreal as of late is the lack of Fearsome blockers that they have available to him. While we don't see much Indoor Spiders or, you know, Wraithcaller decks in general, Fearsome is still very prevalent in the format in the form of Swain, and that's something that we've seen have a pretty good matchup against a deck like this. Looks like now he's considering really hard where he actually wants to throw this Mystic Shot. Ravenous Butcher does represent more damage short term, but perhaps thinking that this Mist Wraith represents more long-term damage, as it does have that Fearsome tag, and there's nothing in FrozenWinter's hand that can deal with that very effectively. And it looks like the Mystic Shot was actually fired off preemptively in order to play around the Bark Beast that we are going to see come down. So FrozenWinter going to be rewarded for that sort of preemptive Mystic Shot. Can still throw down the Shadow Assassin to have a good Ravenous Blocker Butch Ravenous Butcher block if he really wants to. Sorry guys, a little bit tongue-tied there. Gonna bounce it on back though. Actually not gonna throw out the Shadow Assassin at all. Just going to throw this Eye of the Dragon in front of the Bark Beast, I would assume. That does still mean that 7 damage is coming his way. Going to fall down to 9 here on turn number 3. Actually going to hang back the Bark Beast. Does still represent the same amount of damage, you know, as FrozenWinter doesn't necessarily want to block with this Eye of the Dragon. Would make the blocks on the following turn a little bit more awkward. And when we see Rummage fired off, discarding Karma and Deny, 2 cards that are pretty useless in a matchup like this. Karma not really going to get to sit on board and represent that much. Health Potion, not a bad pickup, but it's more of a bandage than an actual answer, especially given that there is going to be a Wraithcaller coming down next turn. To continue to put on the pressure, this Dragonling, definitely a lot better on the off turns than it is on the blocking turns. Does get to block out those Spiderlings from the Elise, but at 10 life, there is a non-zero chance that you just die before that comes out, and we can see Health Potion just fired off on the face here, not only to activate the Dragonling for the next turn, but to get this Claws of the Dragon out of the hand. Not going to be the case here. We see the Wraithcaller come down right after the Endure is picked up off the top, so far, the Allegiance playing out for DK, top-decking that Freljord card, then getting out his Allegiance. And yeah, we are going to see the Health Potion that's going to get the Claws out. Things are not looking great for FrozenWinter, who is really just extremely low on cards. Static Shock can play out a little bit in a matchup like this. Mystic Shot, a very timely pickup, as it does pair well with this Static Shock in terms of removal. So we're going to see the blocks lined up now. I'm not going to try and spout them out before they actually come out. I think they're fairly obvious. You know, if something has that much health, you line it up onto that much attack. We're actually going to see the Mystic Shot onto the Wraith Caller. This does mean that Static Shock opens up as a possibility onto both the Wraith Caller and the Spiderling. Going to take those out pretty cleanly. The concern that FrozenWinter could have is that one of Mark of the Isle that we are seeing. But instead, not going to fire off the Static Shock in combat, I guess just playing around the Mark of the Isle, understanding that he would rather take that 1 damage now than risk taking 3. So we are going to see that post-combat. So if that looked a little bit weird to you, that is likely what he was going for, obviously. Glimpse Beyond opens up as more of an answer post-combat, so FrozenWinter really just playing towards that 1 out that he was afraid of. And with this Spiderling, or this Elise's Crawling Sensation coming out, so all 3 Elises picked up for DK, does mean that he's going to get the evolution off. And while we're not going to get to see They Who Endure come down this turn, he is still going to get to play it before his attack turn. This Thermogenic Beam could be the answer that FrozenWinter needed for something like that, though. I'm not sure how big this Endure is, currently sitting at a 9/9, which means that if no more mana is committed this turn, then FrozenWinter actually has a pretty good case for himself in terms of just blasting that to Kingdom Come with a Thermo Beam next turn. But it looks like, okay, yeah, DK actually going to throw out the Spiderling, potentially just wanting to make room for the Endure, and I do think that means that's what's going to come out next turn, but that does commit FrozenWinter's entire mana pool for the turn, unless he can top deck something like a Will of Ionia to deal with that. So that is up to a 10/10. Health Potion fired off in the face. Oh, and the Thermogenic Beam going to come down onto the Elise now does mean that he has no answer for this. They Who Endure is at the mercy of his own top deck, not respecting the Freljordian Watcher. Let's see what he gets. It's an Ezreal that I think is still pretty far off of leveling, 5 out of 8. 3 doesn't normally feel like a lot, but when you are in a top deck scenario like this, unless you can find a Static Shock off the top to actually get you closer to that, and even then, you know, you're still out of cards. You're at the mercy of the top deck. Ezreal does represent 6 damage by himself when he's leveled. Will of Ionia is actually a phenomenal top deck for FrozenWinter, but DK gets a Scuttlegeist, and while it's not another copy of They Who Endure, it is a massive, fearsome attacker. And FrozenWinter is not going to actually get the Dragonlings out unless he fires off the Will of Ionia now, but he's got to save that for the combat phase so that he can use it onto the They Who Endure so that it can't come back down. But that does mean that DK is free to attack with everything that he has available to him, not needing to worry about these Dragonlings, and is actually even going to top deck another Elise. So that's Elise number 4 coming out for DK, thanks to the Crawling Sensation Overwrite. Is actually going to override his Bark Beast, leaving the Spiderlings available as they do have Fearsome now, just to push that extra little bit of damage. And this should just be lethal. Oh, I thought this was going to be lethal for DK, but instead he actually pulls the Ezreal with the Elise. You know, valuing going for the control play. This does mean Will of Ionia going to come out onto They Who Endure. Can only block the Bark Beast with this Eye of the Dragon, and will need to do so in order to live. So while he doesn't get lethal this turn, DK does at least take out the Ezreal, takes a lot of the resources off the table for FrozenWinter. And now we're just kind of at the mercy of the Karma RNG. You know, what can this Karma create off of her random spell at the end of the turn to pull FrozenWinter back into this one? And then what can he top deck from here on out in order to stave off this massive board of DK? That Sonic Wave is not what FrozenWinter was looking for. You were hoping for, I think True Shot Barrage would have given you a pretty good chance of cleaning up the board into a top deck Thermogenic Beam. Deep Meditation, gonna draw him 4 spells, so actually just getting, you know, everything he could possibly want off the top. Is FrozenWinter picks up 2 more Thermogenic Beams, and that does mean he will have the capabilities to kill this They Who Endure if he really wants to, but does have the Concussive Palm for it on the following turn as well. And FrozenWinter could just claw his way back into this one. DK with the missed lethal on the previous turn because he wanted to kill the Ezreal could just be the downfall for him as FrozenWinter gets perfect top deck after perfect top deck. And there is a leveled up Ezreal with the Karma in play. It doesn't matter if you're at 13 life. These Thermogenic Beams are suddenly representing 8 damage. And the Sonic Wave is just going to be lethal on the following turn if we fire off these 0 mana Thermo Beams. FrozenWinter managing to find his way back into this game. DK valuing the kill on the Ezreal over the potential lethal, just getting hard punished by this string of phenomenal top decks out of FrozenWinter. And, you know, good on FrozenWinter to hold the mental together, understand that there were still a string of perfect top decks he could have in order to actually pull out the win. And it looks like he's considering passing, you know, instead of even attacking with this Ezreal. You know, understands that the Sonic Wave double up does just represent lethal because it is so many spells, and I thought that was not what you needed the Karma to create. But the fact that he gets a deep meditation into an Ezreal off the Static Shock, FrozenWinter, just the god of the top decks on the day, is going to be able to tie up this series 1-1. I cannot believe what I am looking at, and that DK was in a position to lose here, but FrozenWinter gets it done in 1. I guess in 2, in game number 2. You know what I mean. It just rhymed. I got caught up in the moment. Here we are in game number 3, what could have been match point for DK, but instead FrozenWinter was able to find his way back into that previous game in a spectacular fashion. So far, this has been a neck-and-neck series for these players. Game 1, you know, getting picked up by DK with both players at 1 life. Game 2, getting punted a bit by DK after a string of absolutely perfect top decks by FrozenWinter. So excited to see how the rest of this one is going to play out. Now, we got to see DK's deck list before the game. It was the only one shown on screen. FrozenWinter's was hidden from us, and I don't know if that's because of a production error. Maybe I couldn't actually find the scene where they showed the deck list, or maybe these players are actually just running the exact same deck. But a couple of things that are a little atypical out of your sort of traditional Darius Harrowing is there is one copy of Captain Pharaon for both of these players. And now we are going to see FrozenWinter with a bit of a better curve here, though DK has the Harrowing advantage. And, you know, both players just kind of mirroring each other's early games, the Precious Pet into the Disciple, into the Draven. And this is going to play out better for FrozenWinter. Oh, that was the other big thing. There are 2 copies of Whirling Death in the main, so, you know, something that you have to be very cognizant of as long as Draven is on the field. There are a potential 4 copies in the deck between the other Dravens and the Whirling Deaths. And here we're going to see FrozenWinter start off pretty aggressively, has the attack turn when the Draven comes out pivotally, which does mean that he has the potential for this spinning axe to, sort of blow out the Draven with this Precious Pet. Iron Ballista, looking like the weakest card in his hand, could discard that one and not really care about it, as it's going to be quite some time before that card would actually come down, since he's got a couple of Basilisks to run out. And now we get to see which is better. Is it the Basilisk Rider or the Harrowing? Both players have 2 available to them, and honestly, I got to give it to the Basilisk Rider. It just seems a little bit more impactful in ending the game in a faster fashion, and the Harrowings don't feel super great without the Basilisk Rider, so even though DK has a couple copies of them, so far doesn't have anything super threatening to actually play off of them, though will pivotally have that card available to him on turn 6 with the attack token, so sort of the earliest he can get it out, he can if he wants to. Though it'll take a couple of awkward combat steps in order to actually turn that one online. So now that we do have a Whirling Death picked up by FrozenWinter, it's a matter of, does he want to respect one out of the side of DK as well? Does he have the opportunity to bluff it? As whoever sort of throws out the Whirling Death first is going to be the loser on the trade. And FrozenWinter actually going to throw out the Basilisk Rider, says if you've got a Whirling Death, you got it, bud. We'll get to level the Draven if that's the case, likely even, but just the attack out of the Draven, as I said, not going to have that option for the Spinning Axe play and the Precious Pet available to him, as there is now a 4 health unit rather on the side of FrozenWinter. The Iron Ballista comes down post-combat, so FrozenWinter definitely probably feeling like there's a Whirling Death in DK's hand, otherwise the Ballista probably would have come down and attacked. Though, could have gotten traded onto by the Spinning Axe of the Precious Pet, but it still pushes through damage, so, you know, it's definitely a good... DK has done a good job of bluffing the Whirling Death so far, is sort of what I wanted to say there. I'm not sure where my mouth words were actually going in the specific vocabulary I was going to do to represent that, but that's kind of what I was going for there. DK so far, it's very reasonable for FrozenWinter to think that the Whirling Death is there on the side of his opponent, which is why, you know, we see this 1 health unit come out pre-combat instead of the Basilisk Rider. Does still get to represent this Whirling Death. And, you know, it's a really scary scenario to be in, because whoever does fire it off first is sort of the loser in that trade, as you can just Whirling Death the Whirling Death of your opponent, kind of take that off the table. So now FrozenWinter not in love with the trades that he's getting off this turn, could fire off Spinning Axes to take out either the Crimson Disciple or the Draven. Really depends. Do you want to take these potential Draven's Whirling Deaths off the table for your opponent? Do you want to kill this Crimson Disciple and preserve your own life total? It's very strange taking out the Draven, because if you're reading Whirling Death, it's like, am I reading a real Whirling Death or am I reading Draven's Whirling Death? There's absolutely no way to make that read because there are Whirling Deaths in the main. So DK getting the advantage of the mind game so far, and FrozenWinter not getting to push through as much damage as he typically would because he has to respect that card. So now we're going to see the combat play out. There's a kill from the Draven, a trade onto those units, and now DK going to pick up a spinning axe of his own with a kill onto the Precious Pet. And that does mean that we are pretty evened up in terms of card count, though the life total solely in FrozenWinter's favor, who also does have DK below that 10 health breakpoint. So the Darius does get to level as soon as he comes down. DK has preserved the mana for the Harrowing, though he has a very unimpactful one. I think it's like a Precious Pet, an Iron Ballista, and a Crimson Disciple would be what's coming off of that. And maybe you want to set up so that your next one has 4 Iron Ballistas coming out of it. But it does, represent very awkward trades for the following turns. Here we're going to see the Darius. I think because the Whirling Death has been bluffed thus far, FrozenWinter's actually in a very precarious position here, as we do have, the potential Whirling Death coming out of DK, but FrozenWinter has no spell mana. He could just get blown out by that card if he does play the Darius here. So I think that's why we're going to see it hang back. Not even going to use it as a blocker for something like the Draven. Even though it would have 6 health, it would take all 3 spinning axes to actually, get that Draven to take out the Darius. So we're going to see a slew of attacks now out of DK. Going to pull that one back. It's just going to be Draven and Darius. FrozenWinter going to offer up a trade onto the Darius, a chump block down onto the Draven, and not going to fire off the Whirling Death. First one to blink loses. Probably going to develop his own Darius post-combat, and that's actually going to play out really well for him. Even with this Harrowing, DK doesn't have the life preservation to hang on. He could actually just have to throw out this Harrowing in order to have a healthy enough unit to block the Darius, as his current board is just a little bit too weak for something like that. Oh, and there's the Atrocity. That is just lethal out of FrozenWinter. There's nothing DK can do about that one, given his hand. But we do still have to play respectfully of the Whirling Death, so we are just going to see this one come out. We're going to see the block from the Crimson Disciple, and that likely means that Decimate's going to be the play, just to finish this one off. And there is nothing that FrozenWinter's going to be able to do, or that DK rather is going to be able to do to stop FrozenWinter. I was considering the ramifications of a quadruple spinning axe to actually kill the Darius, but because we do have the Decimate, doesn't make a lick of difference, and you would have to discard your entire hand to do that anyway, so you know that your opponent doesn't have the potential for the Whirling Death blowout at that point. So looks like FrozenWinter, playing with the surrender button for some reason, does just have the Decimate, so could you imagine if he had clicked that on accident? Hoo boy. That would have been the blowout of the century. Or at least it would have been if FrozenWinter didn't win that last game in the fashion that he did. I think that kind of gets my vote for blowout of Runeterra's sort of lifetime here. And yeah, now FrozenWinter just going to get this Decimate off, and that's going to be him picking up game number 3 pretty quickly in a less dramatic fashion than the rest of the match has been so far. Alright, we've got match point for FrozenWinter here against DK, but with it being Scouts versus Frostbite Control, I don't think FrozenWinter is going to be able to pick up this game number 4 here. He is heavily unfavored in a matchup like this, so DK is at least likely to be able to force out a game 5 here, though. These Korean versions of the deck are a little bit different than what we've seen. I think we saw Winding God run something similar not too long ago, where you are running these Reckless Trifarians and Kato the Arms and just going all out aggro rather than more of a control-y style, getting off massive Assessor draws in the early game, and it looks like FrozenWinter going to start out with a bit of a better curve, although there aren't really any 1-drops in DK's deck outside of the Yeoman Hawk, but does get that nice little 5 damage opener that we see out of the Scout decks typically, and actually has just the perfect curve, 1 through 6 already lined up for him. But with these culling strikes that potentially could come out of DK to sort of take out this War Chef, one of the juicier targets available for it, as well as the Misfortune. So, DK could stunt his own development a little bit in order to take something like that out, but instead going to offer up his his Trifarian Glory Seeker as a sacrifice to the Fleet Feather Tracker. Ranger's Resolve going to do next to nothing in a matchup like this, if we're being totally honest, as the removal is not damage-based, it's attack-based. Riposte would have been a lot better, and you're frostbiting a lot of units, so the board trades aren't happening as often in a deck like this, and I think that's another one of the reasons that the Frostbite deck has such an advantage. Now we even see Avaros and Trapper come out, a card that's been hotly debated among people as of late. There are a couple of matchups where you actually don't want the 5/5 Yeti as much as you want just other cards in your deck. But against, a Demacia deck, you're going to love to see something like that. We're going to see Culling Strike now fired off onto the Misfortune in order to stop that extra damage from coming through. But without the Yeti off the top, there aren't any other plays available to DK for the rest of the turn. It's going to offer up a block onto this Island Navigator. And I know I constantly say there are no bad 1-drops in Runeterra, but with the nerfs coming down onto the Dreg Dredgers, this 1-mana 1/1 is about as bad as you get. And now we're going to see block onto the War Chef even. Doesn't mean the Island Navigator gets to live, but, the War Chef, a much higher priority target. The Scout doesn't matter nearly as much. We are going to see Quinn come out on the following turn. And another Ranger's Resolve picked up, as well as a Captain Pharaon. Does mean that the next card for DK is that Yeti. And actually still has a pretty good Ash attack here, will probably get blocked out by the Dreg Dredgers, followed by a cleanup onto the Quinn, or a Valor rather, on the following turn. But it looks like we're actually going to see this Culling Strike fired off. Not going to be the case. Is instead perhaps just going to attack with the Ash. But if he doesn't fire off the Culling Strike now, he's actually in a bit of an awkward position, as it does mean that Quinn will be for attack next turn from the Genevieve. I got a little confused because Culling Strike moved to the draw position of the hand, and I was like, wait a minute, Reckless Trifarian, Captain Pharaon, Culling Strike, where's the Yeti? But that's just how things work out in Runeterra. When you play a spell and then take it back, it does move to the other end of the hand. So we're going to see the Culling Strike come out now. I'm going to take that one out, and this does mean that the Ash is pretty safe for the time being. But we are going to see Genevieve come out and buff up that Valor. Does mean that this is a pretty scary attack coming out of FrozenWinter. Is representing 11 damage, or 10 damage rather, just from the Scout attack. So DK could actually just die here. I think the Sejuani is kind of what you have to throw out in order to survive the turn. The Yeti finally picked up, but not going to get to come out. But this does set him up for a pretty good Assessor turn on the following turn. Can run out the Yeti and the Reckless Trifarian into the Assessor. Sejuani will survive the turn, even if Ash will not. That does mean 3 draws, but unless you can pick up something like a Harsh Winds, you still got the board to deal with of FrozenWinter, who picks up a Relentless Pursuit. But with the 2 Ranger's Resolves off the top, he doesn't have the board to really take advantage of something like this. And this is something we've seen play against Scout players a lot recently. Just loading up on too many copies of the Ranger's Resolve, and then top-decking Relentless Pursuit as their board starts to get picked apart. We're not even going to see a second round of attacks out of FrozenWinter. And we're going to see the Yeti get things started off here. I think FrozenWinter mathing out whether or not he has lethal through this Blinding Assault and the Bright Steel Protector. If he doesn't, he's not too far off. I was actually wrong about the amount of mana available this turn. Or not the amount of mana available, but rather how much mana everything costs. So we are just going to get to see the Assessor come down. Draw 2, not be able to play the Reckless Trifarian in the same turn. That's my bad on the math there. But Blinding Assault does represent a scary, scary amount of damage for FrozenWinter, who can fire off this Relentless Pursuit, go for the Scout attacks. He's going to be able to take out the Yeti, as well as potentially pull Sejuani to the side to throw out more damage. Now, this doesn't sound right. I almost feel like it's going to be a challenge onto the Sejuani with the Genevieve, followed by a challenge by the Valor onto the Sejuani. Genevieve opens up trades onto the Yeti if you really want to. It's a little unfortunate for FrozenWinter that he doesn't have the Ranger's Resolve, but he is setting himself up for a pretty nice Scout attack on the following turn as well. And I think the Omen Hawk does mean that he just wants to take the free attack onto this Yeti, and will actually get to downtrade onto the Assessor as well if he really wants to. This Genevieve just getting a lot of work done, though I'm not sure it's going to be enough to actually close out the game. While FrozenWinter almost looked like he had this one, in an unfavored matchup, the double Ranger's Resolve just plays out so poorly for him. Now we actually are going to see DK potentially take advantage of their own attack turn. Instead, we are going to see this Genevieve fire off onto the Trifarian Assessor, getting that nice little trade for free. And this does mean that the Sejuani attack is a little bit less enticing, but not so unenticing that DK is not going to take it. And this is where things get a little bit scary for DK. You know, he does have this Reckless Trifarian that doesn't represent a blocker in his hand. Kato the Arm does. The Culling Strike could be enough. We're going to see Rangers all fired off pre-combat. As we are going to line up this Valor onto the... Or sorry, line up Genevieve onto the Omen Hawk in order to preserve that, as well as the back-to-back. And this could just be lethal out of FrozenWinter here. Going to take the Scout attack, put his opponent down to 11. And we could see this Culling Strike come down onto the Island Navigator just to prevent a little bit of damage, though. That would mean the back-to-back blowouts on the table, and it looks like DK going to respect the back-to-back as well, just to understand that this isn't as much damage as it could be. It's not quite lethal just yet. Ash is going to come down, offer that up as a trade onto this Genevieve. And this is still a really scary Culling Strike for DK to want to fire off. It could just be lethal. I think the Sejuani block is a little bit more likely. Just, you know, take your licks, fall down to 8 HP. I don't think that's too bad of a scenario for you. And we could even just see FrozenWinter proactively fire off this back-to-back to get the trade onto the Sejuani, as well as push a little bit of damage. And then your Culling Strike does potentially find value. Yeah, the back-to-back actually seems really likely here, as it will allow the Brightsteel Protector not only to kill the Sejuani, but actually survive the interaction thanks to the Ranger's Resolve. And I would assume the back-to-back then goes onto the Island Navigator, if for nothing else, just to heal it back to full, but it actually does go on to this Dreg Dredgers, so maybe Culling Strike comes out here onto this Island Navigator, as you don't have any Frostbite available for you in the coming turns to take out you know, any higher attack target with the Culling Strike, but there are no higher attack targets for FrozenWinter. He's going to be left with a board that's a 3, 2, and 1 attack unit, and I think you just need to take out the Scout where you can. So good patience on the side of DK. Does get the back-to-back organically out of FrozenWinter, open himself up for that Culling Strike, and now FrozenWinter, once this back-to-back wears off, is actually left with a pretty weak board, isn't even representing lethal on the following turn. And there's the Iceveil Archer top deck, which sort of, you know, gives you the opportunity to Culling Strike on the higher health targets, but as mentioned, FrozenWinter's down to only 3 attack units, doesn't make that much of a difference. And we could just see Captain Pharaon potentially try to push through lethal here, as he does represent 7 damage given the current board. We do know that FrozenWinter has this Ranger's Resolve available to him, so will actually be able to survive the hit, but isn't going to be able to survive the Decimate. And without a number of high-powered scouts, is actually just going to die to this Decimate on the following turn. So DK, it looked a little bit rough there for him for a second, but is actually able to pull it back. Captain Pharaon does say that I have lethal here. We're not even representing lethal damage because of the Pharaon block, so he's just going to go for it. Pharaon going to line up onto the Brightsteel Protector, leaving DK at 3. There was no riposte off the top. Don't even think riposte is in the deck. And that does just mean that for the second time, we're going to see Decimate end a game this series. And we're going to game number 5. These last 2 aggro matchups, not as dramatic as the first 2, but I'm excited to see what we've got in store for us here in the last one. If you were hoping for a return to the dramatic form of the first 2 games for game number 5, FrozenWinter and DK have saved Karma Ezreal and Karma Lux for last, and this one is probably going to be a bit of a nail-biter. Now, as I had mentioned a little bit earlier, these deck lists were submitted about 2 weeks ago, so we don't see the Vi coming out of the Karma Ezreal as we typically do nowadays. Players have really started to shift towards that 1 Vi, 2 Karma, 3 Ezreal, as we are in a typically very aggressive format, and loading up on Karmas is a really good way to lose the game, but both these players just kind of lining up their early hands. You know, the Chump one potentially getting mulliganed away by DK. I believe he only plays the 1 copy, is going to hang on to that one. And Jury Rig is actually a card we haven't seen out of the Karma Ezreal in quite some time. And overall, this matchup is not one that I'm super familiar with. We haven't seen Karma Lux in quite some time. You know, the Will of Ionia is going to be used for tempo in a matchup like this. The Deny is going to be really important. How many things can you do to stop the Lux from getting off their all-important, you know, spell banking? Let me just adjust in my chair real quick. Sorry about that. We're going to see a Naked Deep Meditation fired off for the Karma Ezreal player, picking up a health potion and a concussive palm. Shadow Assassin on the side of FrozenWinter does mean that he's sort of got the life advantage and the aggressive advantage here, as he is playing Grizzled Rangers. Shadow Assassin going to be the mirror of the play, but that does mean Ranger comes down. Another Grizzled Ranger could come down on the following turn, but, you know, there's Concussive Palms outside of DK to sort of stall that one out, as well as tick up that Ezreal lineup. And I would typically say that Karma Ezreal is probably favored in a matchup like this. You know, I would think that there's not a lot of targets for FrozenWinter to fire off these Final Sparks onto. It is much more of a board control kind of deck, as opposed to DK, who is running sort of this combo, sort of burn style control deck. So I think the win condition for DK just plays out a little bit better here. FrozenWinter doesn't have as much removal for things like the Karma and the Ezreal. It's mostly stall tactics into the hard removal of the Lux, whereas DK has answers for a couple other things. Thermogenic Beam always lining up onto Karma beautifully. I think that, you know, if I had to pick, and I do have to pick as a caster, I would say that DK is probably favored to pick up this match. So now with the double Grizzled Ranger, we're going to see Concussive Palm just kind of stalling this one out. Doesn't have an Ezreal available to him, but does have the Karma. And this is sort of the one hurdle that FrozenWinter does have to get over, is this double Grizzled Ranger. And he still has a fair amount of damage that can be pushed through this turn, as nothing left on the side of DK pairs well into the 4 health of the Badger Bear. Could Jury Rig to actually take out the Scout if he wants to, but, you know, that does still leave the Badger Bear to be dealt with, and it looks like he's actually just going to deny the Concussive Palm, going all in on this sort of aggressive strategy here, saying, I have, you know, a potential 12 damage to push through at you here. You've only got 3 mana to deal with this. You better have Jury Rig Mystic Shot. Even then, you know, I'm still pushing through 3 damage with the Badger Bear. It looks like I think that the Jury Rig is a pretty reasonable play here. It's not great. It's not bad. You would much rather see, like, even Jury Rig Mystic Shot doesn't save as much damage as I had initially misrepresented. I was thinking that for some reason the Jury Rig both kills a Grizzled Ranger and supplies a blocker, but it does just supply a blocker, which means at least 9 damage going to be coming out of FrozenWinter on this turn. And it looks like DK doesn't even want to fire off the Jury Rig in response, saving that for something else a little bit later on. It's just going to fall down to 6 HP. And so far, in the 2 games that we've seen Karma Lux in this series, you know, they've both played out a lot more aggressively than you would typically expect them to. We saw DK opening up with the double Blinding Assault, taking out these eggs systematically from the Anivia deck of FrozenWinter, but now FrozenWinter opening up with the double Grizzled Ranger and committing to it a little bit more than we saw DK do. Does actually fire off his Deny. Judgment, a totally useless card in this matchup, and, you know, outside of Concerted Strike in single combat, FrozenWinter doesn't have much to deal with the Ezreal, but that is still 6 cards that go ahead and kill it. So we are going to see that one held back, and instead Chump Wump going to be the play. And now we're going to see Remembrance out of FrozenWinter. This could eat Deny. This could actually eat Will of Ionia instead, but DK deciding that he doesn't want to turn on the Mage Seekers for FrozenWinter just yet. Says no 6-mana spells for you. Those 4/3 challengers are just going to stay as 3/2s, since I'm really low on life and I'd love not to lose this game. Second Judgment picked up. Really not great here for FrozenWinter. The game could be slipping away from here. He's got the life advantage, but the aggro has been staved off for the time being. The second Concussive Palm going to play against him pretty poorly here. Does mean that Scout Attack is off the table for the turn. The Badger Bear still could go for it, but that is just going to trade onto the Chump Wump. But, you know, you need to pick apart the board of your opponent if you're going to get attacks through, so might as well take this combat trade. And now he gets down his Radiant Guardian if he wants to, with Tough and Lifesteal. Going to give him very, very good defensive tools. Not that he needs it. DK is the one that is on the back foot here in terms of life total. Looks like DK considering maybe a Mystic Shot, maybe a Thermogenic Beam. Anytime you're this low on mana and your Thermo Beam has a target, it's typically something that's going to run through your mind. You don't really have great opportunities to throw that one out onto high health targets. It is a bit too much of a mana commitment in any kind of Ionia Mirror. We see FrozenWinter pick up the Lux, and while there are a couple of Will of Ionias in DK's hand, it almost feels like we're just going to sit here and stall back and forth for a couple of turns, though there is a merit to stalling in matchups like this because that turn 10 comes up on you quick when you're stalling out. That means Karma suddenly turns on to the Enlightenment. And if we see 2 attacks out of DK here, we could see a Judgment fired off just to take out the Ezreal. Not going to be the case. Instead, Concerted Strike going to come out, and this actually plays around the Will, or at least a single Will of Ionia, as both of these will be able to take out the Ezreal. So we could see Will Mystic Shot, and it looks like that will be the case. Does even open up the Mystic Shot mana for when the Ezreal hits the Nexus and gets his own Mystic Shot. So Will of Ionia down onto this Radiant Guardian, Mystic Shot onto the Grizzled Ranger. I think this makes a fair amount of sense. FrozenWinter probably not going to fire off a Will of Ionia onto the Ezreal. There are much higher mana commitment targets that you want out of something like that. Although this Ezreal is now, you know, getting up there in terms of getting leveled. Concerted Strike going to fizzle. There's the Nexus Strike down to 19. Here's the Mystic Shot, and I think this probably just gets fired off at the Grizzled Ranger in order to sort of tick up your Ezreal in a meaningful way. The second Mystic Shot now is the opportunity to kill this at a bit of a later date, and we do still have Thermogenic Beam and Will of Ionia as an answer to that Radiant Guardian, though DK running a little low on cards actually does, you know, have these pseudo-useless mushrooms. We'll be able to get those out in an impactful way once the Karma and Ezreal are leveled, but I think this Ezreal is a bit too far off of getting leveled for that to matter anytime soon. I want to say he's at 5 out of 8 at most. I don't think he has the capabilities to level it here. I could be wrong, though. That is the one thing that is 4 out of 8. There we go. Okay, so even less than I anticipated, and that is just going to be an open pass from both players. Does mean that the Karmas are now leveled. Both players have them available to them, though FrozenWinter does have that sort of immediate Karma into Karma's Insight advantage. Though I'm not sure how much that matters given the hand size that he actually has for himself. We're going to see DK start off with the Karma, and this does mean that the Ezreal is going to level much, much faster. And the Rummage onto the Mushrooms actually, ooh, that Rummage top deck, I missed it earlier, but that is massive for DK, who now gets to fire off the Mushrooms and draw 4 cards. And it looks like FrozenWinter considering just throwing down his own Karma, though he doesn't have nearly as good of a follow-up for it as DK does. You know, while both of these decks are typically very reactive, the Lux deck does have space to play proactively, going for these level ups onto the Lux as well as creating additional Final Sparks. And there is a fair amount of proactivity that can come out of the Karma Ezreal once you're leveled, or once your Karma's leveled rather, so that you can proactively level up the Ezreal much more efficiently. Concerted Strike was picked up off of this Karma's Insight of Ages. Though with the Will of Ionia and the Mystic Shot, DK does have the option to just shut that one down again, throw the Will out onto this Radiant Guardian yet again. Mystic Shot to take out the Karma thanks to his own Karma, and that is going to be the play most likely, as that does just get this Ezreal one shy of being leveled. This is a completely different game when you have leveled Karmas on the field. Everything that you think you know about Legends of Runeterra kind of has to go out the window. The stack interactions become much more complicated, and it's not out of the question that the stack limit of 9 comes up in a game like this. So now we are going to see the Will of Ionia Mystic Shot to protect the Karma, and now I am hard-pressed to imagine that DK can lose this game, as he does have the leveled Karma advantage over his opponent. He has the mana advantage over his opponent. He has the Ezreal, one off of being leveled, is going to lose the Mystic Shot here. Actually, probably thinking about discarding it to the Rummage, just to be, you know, as resource effective as possible. Still going to draw 4 cards. The Mushroom does still represent 4 damage once the Ezreal is leveled, so might as well hang on to that if you can, and discard this Mystic Shot that you are incapable of using. It is a little bit awkward for DK that he does only have Thermo Beams as targeters left in his hand, as that is not something that you really want to use to level the Ezreal. It's a bit too much of a commitment. He's actually going to discard one of the Thermogenic Beams, understanding that this is not a card that is going to be easily played here, and the Static Shock. Now that's a great answer to level up the Ezreal. And we could see it fired off next turn, and even with a deny, since 2 copies are coming out of it, that does mean that only 1 target needs to get through to actually level the Ezreal, and at that point, this game should just be over for DK, who has at least 16 damage in hand, or at least 12 damage in hand, rather, just through the burst spells available to him. And FrozenWinter's got a little bit too much catch-up to play, you know. When one player gets the Karma down and the other one doesn't, and both of you get to untap, it's hard to imagine a universe where the Karma player doesn't win that one. Or rather, whoever has the Karma on board, especially in a deck like Karma Ezreal, where you get infinitely more advantage out of it systematically than you do in a Karma Lux deck, where the Ezreal doesn't have to be on field, you just get to level it up faster. And the leveled Ezreal will end the game faster than the Lux will. And I think FrozenWinter, kind of realizing that he's in a situation like this, has the Mobilize, which would let him get Karma and Lux out in the same turn, but not without any spell mana banked, and it looks like he's just going to throw down that Karma, try and play catch-up a little bit, though it will not work out for him. There are no plays available to FrozenWinter, and while he got off the aggressive start, DK is going to close this one out here relatively soon. We do see the Mobilize, and a pass, actually, which DK, you know, probably just going to pass right back. He is only sitting at 9 cards in hand, doesn't have to play anything. Looks like he is going to play the Eye of the Dragon, as this is only a 1 mana commitment for him, and says, I'm going to continue to develop. FrozenWinter actually offers a pass right back, and without developing any units, FrozenWinter's still in a really rough spot. He is setting himself up to get this Karma and Lux down in the same turn, but without any 3 mana spells in his hand, he's not even forcing a Karma level on that turn. And I understand that, you know, FrozenWinter, I think he loses no matter what he does. So I understand, you know, going for the harder to read play and sort of forcing DK into a position where he can misplay. If he taps down below a certain amount of mana, FrozenWinter can kind of check what he can get done, though the answer is not a lot. And it's really just a scary position for DK to be in. You know, FrozenWinter's playing the mind games. The problem is he just doesn't have the punish for his opponent falling into it. 4 mana is probably about as low as you're willing to go, and it's, you know, not enough for FrozenWinter to probably want to make a move. This Karma does still just die to the Mystic Shot or even the Thermo Beam. Will of Ionia looks like it's being hovered onto the Karma. Maybe that is the opportunity that FrozenWinter was waiting for. Get the Karma reset, put us both at a point where we have to replay the Karmas, although DK has gone so wide on board at this point that he's representing at least 6 damage regardless. And with so many mushrooms in hand, you know he's got lethal with the leveled Ezreal. So it looks like we're actually just going to pass back on that. I think the Will of Ionia onto the Karma was probably one of your best bets for winning the game, but as I said, I don't think there's anything FrozenWinter can realistically do to actually pick this one up. There's no burn available to him. It would have to be like some kind of wild setup into a Dragon's Rage that you never really expect to work out. And FrozenWinter actually has, you know, almost nothing he can do about this. It is just kind of the Will of Ionia play back open available to him, which if you were going to do that, you might as well have done it last turn when it was mana efficient. He did have 7 mana, so this would have left him with 3. Looks like now he is going to fire off this Will of Ionia, and this does let him still get down the Karma or Lux, but not both. And yeah, this is just too much from the side of DK. I do believe that we are in limbo. This is the game state where the game has ended but isn't over yet, and I kind of have to sit here and talk you through the last couple of minutes of FrozenWinter's death rattle, as he's hanging on for dear life, as he did a couple of other times in this match. And while DK probably should have picked up that Endure Spider game and should have already put the final nail in the coffin of this one, it looks like he will actually get it in game number 5 anyway, so that one sort of punted game not playing against him, not punishing him this time around, though he will have to be a little bit more careful of something like that in the future. But in the meantime, FrozenWinter just contemplating what he could possibly do. You know, he's on the mana disadvantage, he's on the life and resource disadvantage. This Ezreal is just 1 away. If he plays any unit, that Ezreal is going to level, and there's nothing he can do about it. You know, maybe you throw down the Lux, and then your opponent plays the Karma, but you don't have a punish for that either, because you did tap down to 9, throwing out this Will of Ionia. If he had played the Will of Ionia last turn, maybe we'd have a chance at coming back into this, but even then, I'm still not really seeing one. These Dead Judgments just not playing out well for him. The Karma and Lux never finding themselves on the table at the same time. And DK, with a timely Ezreal top deck, is going to be able to just Mystic Shot this out. It looks like it will actually be Static Shock. Sort of saving the Mystic Shot as a backup plan. This does mean that the first one will level the Ezreal, so the second one actually going to deal 2 to the face as well. I do think that this means that 3 burst spells are just lethal. Or sorry, 2 burst spells even are just lethal. So the 2 mushrooms going to come out. That represents 8 damage, and that is going to be DK picking this one up, moving on to the semifinals here in the Deck Masters Korean tournament for Legends of Runeterra. Congratulations to both competitors. FrozenWinter going to have to look for his W another day.